law is not, that that law does not rule, does not govern, that what really matters is the force of will, I guess, right? The Mach, to use the German phrase. And I want to lastly point out to you that what Greta Thunberg told to me and others, right? What she was saying is, why do states really exist? States, especially, why are nation states in existence, right? The idea of an ethnic group of some kind that's represented by some state government. They exist because other people in other ethnic groups have a bad habit of not respecting the rights, concerns, interests of the people who are not in states, right? That's how we get the Kurds, we get the Palestinians, we get the Rohingya, we get the Tibetans, right? We get all kinds of folks. Korea under the Japanese Empire. We get all kinds of poor folks who don't have a state. So the idea is you have a state, you have this protection. But then we have the great example of Europe in the 1930s, right? The fact was that, it turned out that, there were Germans, interspersed with all kinds of other peoples, right? Slavs and Poles and Balts and, right? And all these people, they all speak, some of them even speak different languages. And they're all like intermixed, right? And so the idea of the nation state turned into a disaster in 1939, because in effect, let's face it. When Hitler invaded Sudetenland why did Great Britain and France give up the Sudetenland to Czechoslovakia, right? They did it to some extent because they kind of accepted that Czechoslovakia was oppressing the Germans. I'll say that right now. I will also say I think it was trumped up. I think that probably some other alternatives in dismantling Czechoslovakia. But I will say that they did, in fact, have some sympathy for that position, that Adolf Hitler, of all people, was presenting himself as the champion of the Germans. So the point is that obviously nation states are I will finally conclude by saying, I hope that in the long run, the ethnic-oriented nation state is, in fact, a temporary aberration, that the ultimate goal should be the elimination of nation states so that we simply respect each other as human beings. I also that in that sense, what organizations do, whether there's whether there's plebiscites or referenda being proposed, I think are much less important than just public opinion. If you get public opinion to shift through public education, through discussion, through examples, through illustrations, through discourse, then the votes, the laws, whatever, that's for people like me, the lawyers who clean up small details, right? We'll figure it out. We got to have the public opinion to going that way. And as I said, I hope that in the end, we will just simply, maybe not in our lifetimes, but yeah, we will just simply respect each other as people and be under one. We won't have it. The only governments we'll have will not be that. And I will say that California, as a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious state, right, is example of that. Yeah, after all, we are the second largest. We are the state with the second largest number of Jews in the country. We're also the state with the second largest number of Arabs in the country. So the idea that Jews and Arabs can't live peacefully side by side is obviously disproven by California, right? Yeah. We even have 40-some thousand Bhutanese in this country, this state. Look it up in the census. It's amazing the number of nationalities, and they all live here, and they all have their special enclaves. Right, go to Little Armenia, go to Little Russia, right? Go to Little Saigon, right? Of course, so all shows that we can do it, and just I guess so I thank you very much for this conversation, and I'm glad we have more discussion in the future. But that's ultimately our goal, and I believe that it's imperfect has the some of your some criticisms are made about even what's going on with policies from the European governments. States are imperfect, governments are imperfect, politics is always rough and messy, and I totally understand. But I also remember what I'm gonna quote Dr. King, right, when he said that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that when we consider that we started from a time when, we had legions roaming around and, cities being burned to the ground and in sieges and whatever, and all this, massacres going on constantly, I think, the world's has definitely developed in both culturally, technologically, and emotionally. So with that, thank you very much.
I'm going to respond and then we'll go to Matt.
Some more responses? Oh, we can have some question A. You can have some Q&A too, right?
Sure. I just want to give a few responses, and then I was going to step back, and then we'll go Matt and then Polka, and we can do question. If there's a question from the audience right now. Okay, just a couple quick responses. Absolutely agree with Hannah on, there's nothing stopping Californians from just being independent if they wanted to. In fact, CNN said that. I don't have the citation right here, but there was a point where CNN literally had their economic analysis person come on and say, you're so big, if you just decide to leave, what are they going to do? Roll tanks in? They'd collapse the economy, and because you're tied to the U.S. economy, you'd collapse the U.S. economy. You can't blow this place up without putting America's economy into a Great Depression again. Just the way money works. We're so economically linked. And so they were saying you could just do it. To back that up, I want to point out, I think that we're moving to an inevitable plane, and that's why this discussion is so important. We're going to need to pick what type of independence we want, because we're going to be forced to make this decision, I believe, shortly. And the reason is looking at trajectory. 2003, California said, we want to ignore the federal government and do our own stem cell research. That was so shocking that the LA Times wrote an article in 2006 saying, wow, it looks like we're our own nation. 2006. There was a comic that talked about California breaking off from America in 2003 because of the stem cell decision. And then 2 years later, you have this guy called Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he wins the governorship. And he says California's a nation state. And everybody laughed, and they laughed, and oh, how silly. Now every governor calls it a nation state. Isn't that weird? In 2003, we have our own stem cell research. Oh, that's bizarre and strange. And then now here it is 2019, and we do our own immigration, marijuana, climate change, air quality, and pretty much if you ask any Californian, do you want to just do your own thing and ignore the feds? And they say yes. So 2003 to 2018, I would say we had that attitude around 2017. So what are we looking at? 14 years? We went from you tried it first to I'll do whatever I want. 14 years. That's fast. And we went from you're a joke if you call it a nation state to now every governor is expected to do that. As I always like to point out, look at Gavin Newsom when he got inaugurated. No American flags. Not one. What's that say? Why would he do that? Maybe it's just an accident. He didn't know what he was doing. But let's think about this. 2015, the least patriotic state in all of America, according to a survey, was California. We had the least number of people who said, I'm proud to be an American, 2015. Around that exact same time, there was an interesting trend that happened in California. For the first time ever in 100 years, we had more Californians born than moved here. More people born here, never know any other place, first time ever in a century, and right about that same time we have the lowest amount of don't call me an American. Coincidence? Just two random trends, they just happen to be there and they're at the exact same moment, they have nothing to do with each other, or they're directly because of each other? So think about this. Stem cell research, ooh, radical. We do everything on our own. Not radical, whatever. Ignore the feds. Nation state, ha ha ha. Nation state, nation state, nation state. We stopped importing as many people. Now we have more people born here. I don't feel like an American. See all these trends? See how this is going? Now, if we suddenly stop having more births here and we stop being proud about being Californians, I guess it'll reverse. But if you look at this thing, we're going in one direction, and we're damn well going to be a nation state no matter what. So that's why I always argue about trends. I mean, people say, we have a bad day in the movement, never gets me down, because I'm like, where are we going? What are you going to say? The next governor's going to go, we're not a nation state, we're just a state. I mean, is that what people really think is going to happen? I liked Polka's idea about why don't you explore how to become more independent or how you could be kind of quasi-independent. Polka talked about an independence commission. That is exactly what Professor Allison Holmes said in August. So we have a sovereignty scholar and another sovereignty scholar both saying, why don't you have a commission to study how you could do that in the first place? Like, that's a good next step. California does blue ribbon panels, which could do this, or it does what's called little Hoover commissions. We do that all the time. Schwarzenegger did a bunch of little Hoover commissions. They get a bunch of experts together, they come up with a study in a couple months, and they say, here's what we know to be the truth. By the way, when Yes California was called Sovereign California, we proposed a ballot initiative called the Subnational Sovereignty Blue Ribbon Panel, where we said do that. That was 4 years ago. Moving on, I just want to point out, I totally believe that we could have a vote to become independent. So January, February 2017, Stanford University and Reuters, two separate agencies, both did polls, and it was 47.5 to 46% of Californians said, I'm open to thinking about secession. That's damn near half. Now, here's the interesting thing. Stanford University, in their poll in 2017, used demographic numbers from 2010. Anything changed between 2010 and 2017? Anything? Was it that California, for the first time ever, had more Latinos than Caucasian people? Oh, we don't need to pay attention to that when we do a survey, right? That seems fair. And Reuters Ipsos accidentally undercounted the amount of Latinos in California in their survey by 50%. Whoops! Oops! Boop, 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 boop. So 46 and 47.5% undercounted Latinos with either 2010 numbers or by 50%, when in 2015 Latinos became the largest group in all of California. I think that's significant. Now, some of our red state partners, just to show how much they want us out, went back and looked through the data. And you know what they found? When you correctly tabulate the proportion of Latinos in California in 2017, the amount of Californians not opposed to secession jumps to 56.3%. 56.3%. That's a controlling vote. That means if you actually did the survey right, you would have had enough Californians to vote for secession right then and make it legally binding. Just saying. Also, Texas versus White is the Supreme Court case, came out after the Civil War, and it does say with consent of the states, you can legally secede. There is nowhere in the Constitution where it says you can't secede. It's silent. What the Constitution does say is that for all legal disputes and questions, you must go to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court has looked into secession only one time. That was Texas versus White. And they said you can secede. As I understand, the American legal system is based upon what's known as stare decisis, or legal precedent, I believe, versus English common law or French common law, which means you don't get to just make it up. You have to base whatever decisions you have on law based upon previous law. Well, if the Supreme Court said only one time looking at secession that, yeah, you can secede with consent of the states, and that means they're going to have to look at that decision and take that into account whenever they talk about secession. You don't get to decide in American law. So I think we could get the votes, and I think it would be legal, and I think we could pull it off. Now, its key is to get international recognition after you get the vote. Like everybody's been saying here, you got the votes, you're seceding, great. No one recognizes you. You're not a nation. In modern law, it doesn't matter if you did it perfectly and Buddha and Allah came and said, you did it perfect, right. Doesn't matter. If you don't have recognition, you're going nowhere. So I read the book by Bridget Coggins. Professor Bridget Coggins is a California-based university professor, I believe at Santa Cruz State. She wrote a book 2 years ago. And she talked about how do you get international recognition? Well, this is something for the panel and everyone to consider. She said there's no real path. If you have money and power, you just do it and everybody acquiesces to whatever you want. So don't think there's a step that everybody follows. It's, I'm Russia, I'm big and powerful, I just recognize these states. I'm America. Kosovo, you're an independent country.
Yeah.
Why are you? Because I said.
We've got troops there.
Does anybody recognize Kosovo? No, but America does, so you get to be a country. And the Supreme Court backed that up. In fact, according to law, the Supreme Court said that the President of America can just declare a nation independent and just say, I recognize the nation of blah, 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 blah in this area. Poof, you are now a nation and Congress can't do anything about it. Because it's basically seen as a treaty, you have to back all the treaties. And so when America recognized Kosovo, they locked themselves into the system where to make that legal, they had to say, yeah, the president can just declare any place he wants or she at any time a nation and it's automatically a nation. Which means that theoretically, according to precedent, if Donald Trump just wanted to call us a nation, by American precedent,
I tweet.
now I know that gets I understand.
California is an independent country. Okay.
Yeah, he'd spell it wrong. Califna, independent. But I'm just saying, technically, that's the law in America, and that's what Professor Coggins says because of Kosovo. That technically, if Trump tomorrow goes, California, you're a nation, and he signs some document, we're a nation.
So,
That's just throwing that out there. By the way, 4 of his buddies have tweeted, "Get the hell out, and we hate you." By the way, Trump hates us. Trump hates us so bad that Saturday Night Live had a skit last month where they had a map of America without California.
That's right.
So everybody knows Trump hates us. Are you kidding? He'd be fine with us going. But we do need international recognition. That's going to be key. I do believe that Hannah's zeroed in on something important. That's climate change is our path to get it. You know, it's not a coincidence that the French treated us as a separate nation, and then the Germans, and then the Brazilians have a treaty with us on climate change. Oh, I'm sorry, not a treaty. It's called a Memorandum of Understanding. Looks like a treaty. And then Quebec has one, and then all these other countries. So we're signing trade deals with different countries and treaties on climate change. And it's every time you sign one of those, you have to go through the motions of acting like a nation. The only difference is that on that paper it goes Memorandum of Understanding instead of treaty. And in the language it goes, this is not technically binding. So as long as they admit it's not technically binding, it's just an agreement. It's just like a talk, resolution. But if you read these things, they read like treaties. They're just as long and just as detailed and just a few places. So as Professor Allison Holmes said in her speech, what's the difference between an MOU and a treaty when they look exactly the same except for 2 lines? And what's the difference? Right, what's the difference? And what's the difference between Japan signs a memorandum of understanding with California, and so does Brazil, and so does China, and so does Russia, and so does, and at some point California has MOUs with every single nation where it operated like a nation. At some point, that's international recognition.
Wasn't it a treaty with China that Governor Brown?
We have signed a memorandum of understanding on climate change and a trade deal understanding with China, 2 of them. And I just want to point out, yes, having values is important. Yes, promoting democracy is important. But I also want us to be we have to be sober about this. The UN is there's international law. If you're going to get international recognition, you're going to need the Security Council, you're going to need the G8. Well, guess who sits on those? Not all democracies. Just saying, we're going to have to talk turkey with people who don't share our values. I understand people don't want to hear that, but this is the way international law works. We didn't get to pick who gets to be on the G8, the G20, the IMF, or the Security Council. That's already done. And there's two people on there called Russia and China who don't exactly share our values, but we're going to have them be cool with us if we're going to pull this off. Just saying. Now, I know that wrinkles some feathers and not everybody likes it, and of course they don't share our values, but I want to point out something else. There's this country called Saudi Arabia that America's intense allies with.
Yeah.
Give me a break. They chop off heads because you're gay. Nobody has a problem with us being allies with them. And that includes AOC, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. Nobody's going, I'm disgusted with Saudi Arabia. Cut them off. Nobody. So when we're talking about how dare you talk to China, I'm going, yeah, your best American politician says jack about Saudi Arabia. Namely, and all sorts of other places. So get real. You're going to have to deal with some of these people. Secondly, let's talk about America. America would not be independent if it wasn't recognized for France. End of story. The French military won the American Revolution, not the Americans. The American army would never have defeated the British, ever. It was because they had professional troops, later brought in by France, who kicked the British around towards the end, and a professional navy. Those were not supplied by Americans. That's why some historians, including myself, feel that Benjamin Franklin, not George Washington, actually won America. Because he's the one that got France in. And I don't care what George Washington did. If the French Navy and Army weren't there, America never would have won that battle, and eventually people would have got tired out and quit. So we are considered America today because France stepped in. Now, at that time, France was a monarchy. That don't mean they share values with Americans. Americans were still willing to work with them. By the way, this was a country who had shot and killed Americans just a few years before in the French Indian War. So here's Americans saying, I want to be independent. I will only work with people who share my values. Oh, well, then you fail. I'm willing to work with somebody who shot me, killed my family members, blew off half my face, and doesn't share my values. Okay, then you can win. So when we're talking about, I don't want to deal with Russia, I don't want to deal with China, I get it. But that's not how America was successful. Period. And they put up with a lot. They put up with frankly, the way that Americans related to China was to France in the 1700s was worse than our relationship with China and Russia. Nobody here has been shot at by a Chinese soldier or a Russian soldier. Nobody's had troops from those countries land here and blow up whole villages. Well, the Americans did, and they still were willing to be allies with the French. Just saying, they were willing to put up with a lot for freedom. So we should be considerate of these things.
That doesn't necessarily mean that we prioritize Russia over Europe, though.
Oh, of course not.
No, I want to make sure that's very clear. And that's why I'm not too sure we could at this stage have very good relations with the Russian government, and I think as opposed to Russian dissidents. But yeah, I want to put that out and put that on the record right now. That no, we're not saying we're not going to make the mistakes that we made in the past. Yeah, it is Europe, it's Japan, it's Korea, it's the free states, the free countries, and Canada and Mexico to start with.
I'm just saying we'll need to be.
Well, of course, realpolitik will always.
That's all I'm saying is realpolitik, and everybody plays that game. If we want to act like a nation, we're going to have to do some at some point. I'll leave it at there. Thank you. Matt, and then Polka, and then Hannah.
You guys already spoken. Should we have some question and answer? Honestly.
Yeah. Question and answer?
I just keep rolling around and round.
Yeah.
Okay, question and answer.
I'm sure there's something.
Questions from the audience?
Yeah, as it is.
But let me respond to some of the.
There's nobody has any questions. I'm sorry. Is there nobody? Sue, you have any questions about what's going on? Daniel, usually no. Okay.
No.
Then of course, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Whatever.
I'll be brief. Thank you.
Well, maybe there's just question and answer. That's right. Let's yourself.
Well,
basically,
just some of the remarks that have been made. We don't want to end up like the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus with zero recognition except from one state that happened to send their army and liberate us. Okay, or like Kosovo again, the same sort of situation. We don't want that. We do want recognition from as many sovereign states as possible, and the mechanism again of finding a legal way to attack our annexation, I think, would be an excellent first step. Go to the ICJ, said we were annexed illegally on this grounds, and then take an opinion favorable to our position, if there is one, to the General Assembly, and then we wouldn't end up like the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Okay, we would have, and it doesn't have to be de jure recognition either. It can be MOUs, which we're already doing, okay, with various governments. And speaking of which, and also of these commissions, special commissions, early this month, a very special commission was formed, and that's the Special Commission of the Californias. Okay, right. The week after we did the flag ceremony in Tijuana, right across that Iron Curtain in San Diego, the governors of the three Californias set up an Inter-California Commission. So this growth and reunion of California, which makes us even stronger, like the reunion of Germany did, is rolling. At the same time, another interesting fact was mentioned, and that is for the first time in 100 years, we have more native-born Californians than we have immigrants. And that's immigrants from the U.S., from Mexico, from overseas. For the first time, we have more native-born than immigrants. Guess what else is happening? More people are leaving California than are entering. A lot of them consider themselves Americans.
Good riddance.
Yeah, exactly. So we're separating out, okay, people that believe in our dream, believe not just in our dream, but how we manifest it, come here, as well as the ones who stay here. The ones who don't believe in it leave. They do. And they take advantage of the fact that so far there isn't an international border between the United States and California. Okay, and we would never be the kind of country that would prevent people from leaving. Prevent people from leaving. It's ridiculous. So we're sorting ourselves out between the Americans and the Californians. Of those who come in over the U.S.-Mexican border, the compañero from Baja was mentioning that most of them are Californians too, from Baja. So our country is advancing with confidence towards independence and reunification more rapidly than we could have imagined. Okay, for us to put on our little demonstration in Tijuana, where we offer the 36th flag, and then within a week, the three governors are setting up a commission. That's extremely rapid progress. We were just dumbfounded by that. Mm-hmm. And things are picking up so quickly. And again, it's a matter of global survival. If we don't have an independent California as a fulcrum from which to lever the necessary changes to reverse the global warming, all this becomes academic. Okay? It wasn't Greta Thunberg who's saying this. It was the scientists that she read. And she's known about this since she was 8 years old. Okay? The scientists themselves have known about it since the 1970s. We need an independent California to be the fulcrum from which we lever the changes necessary for the survival of the human species. It's never been clearer or more urgent.
Okay, Hoka, please come on up, and then any questions from the audience? Okay. responses to what you've heard today?
I actually had a quick question for both, which doesn't have to do with Hawaii, but you mentioned both in the historical facts that both Alaska and Hawaii were in the same situation. Do you feel that Alaska has the same, the same rights and the same way about to get their independence? Because we've talked to segments of Alaskans that want to secede, but so you're very paralleled with
Yes.
them because you were at the same time in history taking over, basically. So what is your opinion on that for
It-
Alaskans and for you?
In terms of international right, Hawaii and Alaska are in the same boat. There are differences, but looking at the legal international history, Alaska and Hawaii has been treated by the United Nations in essentially the same way. The difference is that I believe the independence movement is larger in Hawaii and it's more firmly developed because of our difference in history. Hawaii having previously recognized as an independent nation. Alaska was simply sold by the Russians to the Americans when they had no right to even sell Alaska. So they follow from a different history. So there's some differences, but the essential principle of the right to self-determination are the same. But the differences are also very important. And this comes back to the question that we are having here. If you are going to claim to have all of these reasons for independence, the real test is, are you acting as an independent nation? And you can look at one or another aspects of independence and declare, well, we are independent because we can control stem cell research. Let's take a look at what distinguishes an independent nation from a nation that has some degree of autonomy but not really exercising independence. First of all, control of immigration. Normally, only the central government controls immigration. Should California say, from now on, we shall determine who comes in, who does not come in. We shall determine our population growth, not only from across the Mexican border, but from any other state. We shall control our borders. Now you are exercising a sense of sovereignty. You are exercising one of those principles that normally the central government controls. The second, taxation. See, we refuse to finance our continuing colonization. That becomes a test. The third is foreign relations. Your trade agreements, determining your own trade agreements and defending your own trade agreements. Your ability also to do so, and the ability to get other countries to sign on. The next would be jurisdiction, court jurisdiction. To what extent will you concede jurisdiction to the federal court system? And simply say we refuse to go along. Now, it's not a question of whether or not it's a good decision or a bad decision, but the authority of the federal courts to exercise jurisdiction over California is an exercise or is a question of self-determination, is a question of nationhood. Next would be national security control. National security control. Normally, central governments are going to come in and say, we are the ones who determine national security because we control the nation. So that's a very serious concern. Are you ready to take up your own national security control? And then if so, then evaluate how are you going to use national security. Is it still going to be the American formula of the type of national security that they follow, which is not necessarily defense. It's a Department of War. They just call it a Department of Defense. They change the name.
But not
You know?
correct.
So it's another thing that you need to consider. And under what formula, how would you develop a national security system? It doesn't need to follow the style of the American military. There are so many other ways of national security. You know, you have countries without a military. And so you build a national security not based on armament. You build a national security based on the pride of your people, the trade relationship that you have, or other alliances that you build with other nations. Those whole things need to be reconsidered in terms of national security so that you need not be afraid of others.